Hey ExJWers, thanks again for stopping by. If you're new to the channel, my name is Riley and I'm a former Jehovah's Witness. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Mark Joyce. Mark was raised as a Jehovah's Witness but started waking up from his indoctrination in 2011 and ultimately left the organization in 2012. Mark also started a YouTube channel in March of this year where he discusses the topics he researched for his book entitled Is It Really So? Mark, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, Riley. Yeah, really excited to be here.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for joining me. So, I've been watching your channel for a while now. I really enjoy it. I'm also working my way through your book. It's absolutely superb. You're obviously a very thorough researcher, which is really impressive, and that's one of the things that I really like about your channel. But if you could just go into some detail about how you first became acquainted with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, I suppose you could call me born in some sense. When I was just very young, like 2 or 3 maybe, my dad became a witness and raised us in the belief system. So, like from very young, I have very early and like happy memories of like going to the Kingdom Hall and going to meetings and feeling like it was a nice place to be. Um, but then when I think it was roughly around 1986, um, my dad left the organization, um, but he was still like totally mentally in. So we were raised pretty much after that point was no religion, but with every now and then being told that Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth and Armageddon's coming and all of their beliefs are true and based on the Bible. So yeah, it was kind of a very strange experience because at one like in one level I had a religion, but we were non-practicing. So like I saw myself as a Jehovah's Witness, but Jehovah's Witnesses didn't see us as Jehovah's Witnesses, if you know what I mean. Um, and then I remember something really vividly that like I know totally triggered me to fully get involved, and that was a time when I was like maybe 16 years old, maybe even 15, and I was up in the attic, and like my dad kept all the old watchtowers, all the old awakes. I mean, the attic was just stuffed to the gills full of old watchtower books and publications, and I was going through the attic and going through all these watchtower magazines, and I would read all the books myself, um, but I came across that that old Awake magazine where it says 1914, the generation that will not pass away, and it has all the old faces and they're kind of getting older and older, and I read that, and I read it like in the attic then and there, and that was it. I knew, like I was just stunned. I didn't know that aspect of the teaching, um, and so I went like after that. I went downstairs. I gave it to my dad, and I said, "Did he know? Like, did he know this truth?" And he said, "Yeah." And then I said to him, "Why don't we go to the meetings anymore?" And he said, "I don't know." And so after that, I decided the next witness I saw, I would stop them. I would ask them, could I have a Bible study, where the meetings were, and yeah, like a couple of months later, I did exactly that, and I was baptized a year later. So that's how I came to be baptized. And I'm the only one in my family too who did that. I've got like 3 other siblings, and they never did anything like that. But yeah, that was how I got involved.
Right. Wow. So, would you describe yourself as a very studious person?
Oh yeah, yeah, always. Like I was, yeah, I've always read books. It's always where I've gotten my information from. Um, yeah, so like yeah, that was like when I first joined the religion, I just drank it in. I mean, I was reading all the old publications, the books from the 50s and the 60s. Like, just read them all. Um, um, like the Bible study I had was just pretty much like, well, I saw it more or less as just a process that I had to go through in order to become a witness, because like I just knew it already. I read the book like 5 or 6 times, like well after I was given it. So yeah, I've always read a lot, always, and so like in the organization, I knew it back to front. I knew it extremely well, and that was why it was a bit of a shock for me when I woke up, because I really thought I knew so many things that I didn't really know. Even the things that I thought were true weren't true, and it was quite a shock to me, because you know when you read so much and you think you know a lot, and then you come face to face with this idea that, well, you don't. Yeah, I think that's what really in part that's what motivated me to write the book, because I just felt like I had to like thoroughly deconstruct the whole thing, so that like I could just like put my hand on my heart and say, I'm absolutely thoroughly convinced this isn't true anymore, and like I have enough good reasons to say that's not true. So that was kind of where I came from with the book. I mean, I could have done another way. I mean, I could have started a YouTube channel. That's never ever occurred to me until very recently. I think it's because I've always gotten my information from books. Like that's how I learn, and that's what works for me. And so that was just kind of almost an instinctual idea that I wanted to like articulate my reasons for rejecting the beliefs in book form.
Yeah, so all right, from watching your channel, I get the impression from you that you're extremely studious and that you really research things very, very well, that you're not content with just scratching the surface. And would you say that that side of your personality is what helped you to indoctrinate yourself, but at the same time, it's what helped you to deconstruct that indoctrination?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, because I read a lot, and it's something that I enjoy. I mean, um, like there's no end of Watchtower literature, right? I mean, there's like tens and tens of thousands of pages. You could just read it all day, every day. And so when you have that kind of mindset, you can go like you can take deep dives into the Watchtower dogma, and you know you can start to feel that you really understand this thing in depth. And yeah, and then when you realize there's a whole other dimension to the Bible, and who wrote it and when it was written and what it means or what it might mean. Yeah, it took me in another path, but the process was the same. I just wanted to know what it was, like really, and so yeah, like the idea that I like to learn from books meant that when I started waking up, that's the avenue I went down, and I think the idea that you said about um, uh, like what got me involved was the same thing that woke me up. Um, is like it reminds me something. I don't know if you're familiar with Friedrich Nietzsche, but he wrote a book about I think it's in Toward Good and Evil, where he said that the ideas in Christianity about things being true were the very thing that was going to topple it, because if people have this idea in their head that pursuing truth is good and is noble, then even if that idea comes from a manifestly false dogma, it's going to undermine it, because if people have that idea in their head that truth is a good thing, then it's going to dismantle the entire edifice of the orthodox belief system from where it came. And like to some extent, Nietzsche kind of predicted that Christianity would end up destroying itself because it's based on this idea of truth. And I think the whole Watchtower dogma is quite similar, because they constantly stress this idea: it's the truth, it's true, and it's actually not. It's just a euphemism for their dogma. But if someone gets this idea in their head that truth is important, and I think I did, um, when they allow themselves that initial thought that something here isn't true, there's something wrong here, this idea of truth being valuable kind of takes over. And well, I want to know what's true now. I really genuinely felt that, even though it was very disturbing. I had this idea that if it's not true, I just had to know, because it being true was really important to me. And this is something I've come to understand now, I think, that there's a lot of people in the organization that don't really care for truth. It doesn't really matter to them, I think. And I think many people who do value actual truth are the ones that probably have a better chance of waking up.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting what you said about there are some people in the organization that really couldn't care less whether it's true or not. I mean, I could give you a list of names. Obviously, I'm not going to.
Yeah, I think that's why some people say, even if it wasn't true, it's still the best way of life. I think that's a real giveaway, because what they're essentially admitting to is, like, truth is unimportant to me. It's the feeling of comfort and satisfaction in my life story, and the story I'm telling myself. That's what's important to me, and because that's never an expression I used when I was in the dogma. I never said, even if it wasn't true, it's still the best way of life. I mean, if someone said to me, even when I was like fully in, if it wasn't true, would you still go to the meetings or go on the preaching work, I would have instantaneously said no. So yeah, I think the idea of a person really valuing truth is a really good indication that they might have some potential of waking up at some stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had those conversations myself with people who have said, you know, even if it isn't true, it is the best way of life. And looking back now, I think that many of those people, they probably had doubts themselves. They probably had doubts as to whether or not it was the truth, but they just thought to themselves, well, you know, I'm content with my life. You know, I'm happy in the organization, and that's more important as to whether or not the doctrine is true.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when a couple of elders came to meet me just shortly after I started waking up. I stopped attending meetings, and um, I asked them a couple of questions, like really simple, basic questions, and they were totally stumped. And I can't remember what the questions were, but it's kind of irrelevant, because one of the responses from the elders was, "Well, I'm not changing now. No, I've been a witness for 50 years. I'm not gonna just like suddenly like change and join another religion or become an atheist." And it just struck me as just so bizarre that the mindset, this is an elder speaking, the mindset of this elder was, well, I've been a witness such a long time now, I have no interest in changing. And my mindset was, well, if it's not true, then you're lying to yourself and you're wasting your time. So that should be something you should at least want to know. But yeah, there's like a mental barrier, like a permafrost in their mind, that just nothing can penetrate below that. And it's just, this is my lifestyle, this is what I want to believe, and that's what I'll believe.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real shame, you know, that there are people who are like that. But would you say that when it came to your waking up, was there one thing that stands out in your mind that was like the first thread that you decided to pull?
Yeah, yeah. It's I've thought about that quite a lot, because it was really quite it was a difficult time in my life, like a really stressful time for several years. And um, I do remember one book I read, and I write about this in the preface to my book. Um, I remember reading The Better Angels of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, and I encountered it totally by chance. I was just wandering through a bookshop. I was fully mentally in at this stage. I was like an elder and a pioneer. Um, and the title of the book really just grabbed me because it was, the subtitle was The Decline of Violence in History and Its Causes. And my initial reaction was, well, that is not true. Like, the dogma says that we're living in the age of violence. You know, wars and violent crime have never been so high. And so I just thought it was like a really interesting, and I knew Steven Pinker, like I knew he was like a heavyweight intellectual, so this wasn't going to be some, you know, wasn't going to be a waste of time. So I bought the book, and it's pretty big and it's pretty deep, and it goes on for like 700 pages. But when I finished the book, and it took me a few months to read it, I couldn't resist his conclusion that we're living in a really extraordinary time in history where crime and violence are at historic lows. War is less common than it's ever been, and even when war does happen, deaths are lower. Civilian casualties are much lower, and I knew that that accepting his conclusion meant I would have to discard my belief in the last days. It just, the two of them just could not go hand in hand. And it's not like I just kind of clicked my fingers and said, well, okay, I'm going to pick one. It was like a really torturous process of which one am I going to decide? And I have a huge emotional and intellectual commitment to the dogma. But I just could not ignore what Steven Pinker was saying in the book, and that was the initial thing that really kind of rocked me, and it made me say to myself, okay, I can't accept the conclusion that we're living in a more violent time than in the past, which means the whole last days dogma is in question. So if I'm wrong about that, what else am I wrong about? And that just made me kind of, it wasn't an instantaneous thing, but it's kind of started me on the path of, okay, I have to deconstruct this whole thing. You know, what else have I been missing, or what else didn't I know, or what else do I need to know? And I remember distinctly asking myself, if I was to encounter the religion now for the first time, what questions would I be asking? What information would I need to know before accepting it? And so that was really the thing that started me down that.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. So I think a phrase that is almost inextricably linked with witness doctrine and waking up is cognitive dissonance. And it's something that all witnesses have, whether they're waking up or not, to some degree. Did you find that you had that when you started tugging on this thread of, you know, whether or not we're living in a more or less violent time than in the past? Did you at any time just like put that to the back of your head and just like ignore it, or did you feel that you had to face it head on and confront it?
Yeah, I think for quite a while, like as I said, it took me months to read the book, because I normally have like several books that I'm reading, so I'd say it probably took maybe 3, maybe 4 months to finally get through the book, and I do remember thinking this is a really interesting book, and there's things here that I need to think deeply about, but it wasn't an instantaneous thing. I was able to compartmentalize and kind of think, well, this is an interesting book. It's full of facts and figures that I can't dispute, and it challenges part of my beliefs, but I'm not going to go there. I did spend several months just not addressing that issue, but it was the spark. I mean, I think to some degree when you are experiencing that kind of mindset, that cognitive dissonance, it's not like you can completely put it away. It's always kind of there nagging you to some degree, and you can either decide to kind of just live with that discomfort, or to go there to address it. And I couldn't tell you exactly why or how I kind of came to that decision, but I did make the decision eventually to not restrict my information to only Watchtower literature, and to kind of to examine the religion in light of information that the governing body, say for example, would not want me to read.
Mm. So after you resolved, you after you confronted this issue, and you accepted that, or basically you accepted the findings of that were explained in that book. What happened next? Did you start looking for other things that the witnesses might be wrong about?
No, no. I remember. I think the next book I read was from a former evangelical Christian missionary who lost his faith, because even at this stage, I was having real difficulty with the Last Days dogma, but I would still have no interest in like apostate information. Like, it never occurred to me to go to websites or read books that were from former witnesses. Just still had no interest in that whatsoever. But I think, like, just from my reading list on Amazon or something, this book came up. It's called Why I Believed by Kenneth Daniels, I think it's called. And I remember reading, his journey from like being a missionary to losing his faith, and it sounded like it could have been written by a witness. Lots of the ideas and lots of the things he was going through, the things he was struggling with, like you could have replaced his faith in Jesus with Jehovah, and the way his family and his friends started treating him, and the thought processes that he was going through while losing his faith just sounded so strikingly similar to what I was experiencing, and the way he was talking was like a witness might talk. And I started thinking to myself, well, it makes total sense what he's saying about him losing his faith. Maybe I'm going through the same process, and it's a very interesting book too. I mean, he takes a bit of a deep dive into the Bible too, and a lot of the evangelical beliefs. So I started thinking then perhaps that's the route that I might start taking.
So while you were going through this deconstruction process, was there anything that you discovered or learned that really affected you negatively, or that shocked you in any way?
No. I think for a very long time my waking up process was maybe a little bit different from a lot of people. I know from watching like other people's stories that they like immediately go into the like failed prophecies and the Australian Royal Commission, and these things shock them, and then they wake up and they see everything so new and fresh after that. But no, I just started reading books. So I started reading books from, like, say, archaeologists and Bible scholars, and philosophy books, and history books, and like for a lot of what I was reading wouldn't necessarily contradict the Watchtower. Some of it would, but whenever I came across something interesting, I'd always like take a note and allow myself to go back to that later on. But like one real eye opener, it didn't affect me negatively, but I think the book that really I know transformed my view of the Bible was Richard Elliot Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible? And yeah, I mean, it's just astounding. It bowled me over that I thought I understood this book and I thought I knew what was in it, but I didn't have the first idea. It was just it totally transformed my view of where it came from and who wrote it, and I was just mesmerized reading it. I'm not. You asked me about like a negative experience, but Um, it was to some extent a negative experience because I felt like I'd been lying to myself about this book for so long. Um, and yet at the same time I was like super excited because I was learning all these fascinating things that like I love to learn things. So it was like at the same time it was like exciting, but also it was very nerve-wracking to start knowing these things. Um, and I was reading this book and I was still an elder, and I was up there, giving talks, and I'm thinking to myself as I'm saying these things, I don't believe this anymore. Um, and that was something that really affected me because, like when you're telling people this is true, and you have lots of information that tells you otherwise, it's very very uncomfortable. Um, and you're going on the preaching work, you're telling people X, Y, and Z about the Bible, and I'm thinking to myself, no, I don't believe that either anymore. So yeah, learning lots of things about the Bible that I never had any idea was the case, and then having to like being obliged to tell other people something different, um, was quite stressful for me. So that was one of the main reasons I stepped down. I had this huge anxiety that I was now pushing something that just wasn't true.
Yeah, I can only imagine how difficult that conflict must have been to resolve, and it ultimately led to you stepping down, which was, under the circumstances, the only decision you could have made, really. So how did things progress from there?
Um, well, I stepped down as an elder, and I initially felt like huge relief. It was it was almost like that burden was taken from me. But like within a matter of like days or weeks, I realized that it wasn't over. I needed to like fully settle the question: do I believe this or not? Um, um, and so I'd say maybe a couple of months after I stepped down as an elder, I stopped preaching. Um, my meeting attendance was on and off, and I'm pretty sure if I wasn't married to a witness, I would have just simply stopped going to meetings, like I stopped going on the preaching work. But like there's a huge pressure there because like my wife was a witness, and like it was stressful for her too because like I was a former elder and a pioneer, and now I'm not, and now I'm not even preaching, and now I'm not even going to all the meetings. And so like for several months I would go to meetings just to make it easier for her. Um, but then I just had to be honest with myself and say, look, I don't believe this anymore. So I just completely stopped going to meetings, and it was around that time too that I started thinking about, well, yeah, your entire worldview just starts to shift. It's you start thinking about what your goals should be, um, what your moral values should be, um, what you want to do with your life, because it's almost like you're starting from nothing again. So um, I enrolled in university then later that year, um, and yeah, that was haven't been to a meeting since. And what I what I did when I was in university, strange enough, I studied like economics and sociology. It had nothing to do with history or Bible scholarship. But if you were to find me in university, I'd probably be going through some journal or some book that was relevant to my mental state at that time. What am I thinking about now? Is it the last days, or is it the Bible's consistency, or is it um, it, who compiled the canon of the Bible? I mean, all these questions that I was now looking at afresh. I was thinking about during those years in college, and that's when the idea kind of hit me that kind of compiling all the information that I was learning might be a useful thing to do, because my wife didn't want to know. All the people that were my friends were kind of avoiding me. So the only thing I felt that I could do was like have that dialogue with myself, and kind of just like write it out, and so that's kind of where the idea for my book came, and yeah, so that's pretty much what I did from then on. Because as soon as I graduated from university, my wife told me that she wanted to move back to Finland, and she's Finnish. So, like the day after I graduated university, we moved to Finland. So, I was even more isolated then because I was like pretty much totally alone, living in a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. I couldn't find a job. And my wife didn't want to know anything about, why I left. So the only thing I really had during that time period was researching and writing the book, and it's kind of what I think kind of kept me going. It was just a very lonely and stressful time, and the only kind of structure I had in my life was looking into the dogma.
Yeah, that must have been a really difficult time. I can only imagine how isolating that must have felt, especially since it's not just isolating because you were in a foreign country and couldn't speak the language, which means that you didn't really have a support system. Waking up is its own form of isolation as well, because you're now extricating yourself from a belief system that you've held for most of your life. You're now on the outside of something. There's a mental isolation that goes along with that as well, which I've certainly experienced that in my own experience, and it's not an easy thing to live with. It's not easy at all. When you were waking up, did you try and wake up anyone else?
No, I didn't. I mean, I had some tentative conversations with my wife, but it was very clear she didn't want to know, and I didn't want to push that on her because, well, the whole process was very stressful for her too, and like me trying to force her to listen to information I knew would be counterproductive, and I also remember when the elders came to visit me, like at one point I was like really extremely anxious, and I was depressed, and I even had like suicidal ideations. I mean, I just thought this is too much for me to cope with. Like my entire life was just crumbling, right? I mean, everything that I thought was true seemed to be not true, and the people that I cared about didn't seem to care about what I was going through. And I remember telling the elders that when they came to see me, and they just blanked me. They just, like, and I'm not judging them now, but they just didn't know how to cope with that. I told them that I had thoughts of killing myself, that I was that distressed about what I was learning, and they just let that comment go. And then the next question was, we just want to know if you're going to tell anyone about what you're learning. And so like they were just like they had this tunnel vision of, okay, look, this is what you believe now, or you've stopped believing this. This, they called it the truth, of course. You stop believing the truth. That's your business. But if you ever dare to like tell other people and draw other people after you, we're going to have to do something about that. And so that terrified me. I mean, I was, yeah, like at the time, I now had like one relationship left in my life, and that was my wife. And if I was disfellowshipped, I kind of thought, well, then that's over. I mean, I don't think our marriage could have recovered from that. And so yeah, I didn't try to convince anyone else, because I was bullied into not doing it. I mean, I knew what the consequences would be. I mean, it wasn't like it was a veiled threat. It was like very, very quite direct. I mean, you tell anyone else, we will come back, and it won't just be a conversation. I think that's exactly what he said. We'll be coming back, and it won't just be a friendly conversation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really terrible. That sounds like, you're dealing with organized crime.
Yeah.
That's what the conversation sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, well, yeah, we run the truth racket in this town.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so you started writing your book. How did you feel when you finally finished and published it?
I think I think the two moments in my life where I felt most proud was when I got baptized, and when I finally had a copy of my book in my hand. Uh, I loved reading and researching and writing the book, but like editing the book and formatting it for paperback. I mean, I did all that myself, and it was just so much work and effort, and I really hated that part of it. But when it was finally finished, yeah, I was just super excited. I mean, yeah, felt like I'm not a person that would feel proud of myself very often. Um, but yeah, I felt quite proud of myself when I finally published it, and I could see it was up for sale, and I had no illusions that I was going to be selling millions of copies. That I never really wrote it for that. It was just the act of actually doing it and like publishing it was, yeah, I felt proud of myself.
And so you should. I mean, from what I've read of it so far, I mean, what you expressed when you read, what was the name of the book you read? Who Wrote the Bible? All of the feelings that you expressed, that you felt when you were reading that. As you were saying that, I was saying to myself, that's exactly how I felt reading your book. Honestly, just in the first couple of chapters alone, I was completely amazed and blown away, because it was presenting me with all of these things that I just had no idea of previously. It completely turned everything that I thought, you know, upside down, and I'd already woken up.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. So yeah, you
Yeah.
you you, you should. It's a fantastic achievement. You should feel proud of yourself about that. And this is something that comes up with a lot of witnesses and ex-witnesses, is we're not used to self-celebration.
Yeah.
We're not used to self-celebration at all. It's something that goes completely against the witness culture. It's not compatible with being a witness. Feeling proud of your achievements and self-celebration. Everything's got to be directed towards the organization.
Yeah, that reminds me of something. When I was an elder, um, I treated my public talks like I would treat how I dealt with the book. I mean, I would like go 100% into them, and I would do tons of extra research and get lots of extra information, and almost always people would tell me they loved my talks, and they were they just thought they were so informative, and I really got satisfaction out of that. But sometimes, and it's usually another elder, would counsel me on them because they had too much non-watchtower information. But one thing I would often hear is from other witnesses after I've given a talk is how grateful I should be to the organization for teaching me how to speak publicly. It wasn't like many people were very generous with their comments, but you'd often hear this too, that it wasn't something that I had done or prepared myself, that the Watchtower had given me the gift of being able to speak publicly. It wasn't something that I'd worked on myself or researched myself. It was a gift from the organization to me, and I should be grateful for that. And I think that kind of speaks to your point that if there's any kind of congratulations or respect or honor given to a person, it's seen as being a bad thing or a negative thing. It always has to go back to the organization. and like that's your function really, to kind of shift adulation and respect from yourself to the group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sad, really. I mean, yeah, as you know, men in the organization giving public talks, you're not even supposed to really accept compliments when people give them to you about your talk.
Right.
You know, which
Yeah.
it seems completely bizarre to me now. But when you're in it and you don't really know any different, you feel that accepting a compliment is somehow being prideful or big-headed,
Yeah.
which is a really ridiculous notion. You know, that's one thing that I really can't stand about the organization, is that it takes everything, absolutely everything, to the extreme. There's no middle ground in anything. You know, it is possible to be proud and feel proud about something you've achieved without at the same time being a big-headed braggart. You know,
Right.
Watchtower tries to present this idea that it has to be one or the other, but it doesn't have to be one or the other. There is a middle ground in that.
Yeah, that's the problem with like high control groups. There's no room for nuance. It's just it's one or the other, and you you're under obligation to kind of just jump from one 100% viewpoint to another, and it's usually at the say so of another person. Yeah, like that's one of the great things about being out, isn't it? You can kind of say, well, you know, on some things I might be a bit of a liberal, and on some things I might be a bit of a conservative, and that's cool, and I'm happy with that. Whereas the organization is like, no, you have to be on one side, or you have to be on the other, and one is fully good and one is fully bad, and it's a huge. I find it a huge relief to be able to allow like nuance and subtlety in my opinions and my thinking, and to be open to kind of think, well, I also might not know what I'm talking about. I might need to be corrected somehow, and leaving that option available. It's just not something that witnesses really are allowed to do, is it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and what you said really resonates with me as well, because that's kind of like my new life philosophy, for want of a better term, is balance. Is that
Yeah.
the truth is never to be found in extremes. Truth always lies somewhere between the two extremes, not necessarily dead center in the middle, but definitely not at either end.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me of something I read in. I don't know if you're familiar with Eric Hoffer. Um, he's dead now. He's an American philosopher, but he said when the Nazis were recruiting people for the Nazi Party, um, they didn't just go to the general population. They usually went to the communist meetings, and even though they were like diametrically opposed from each other, he said the reasons that they went to the communists to recruit them to be Nazis was because they were actually the same. They were extremists, and extremists don't generally care what their extreme viewpoint is. They just want an extreme viewpoint. And he said, like, the opposite of an extreme left winger is not an extreme right winger. The opposite of both of those is like the moderate centrist who's able to say, well, I'm forming my own beliefs, and I'll take what I think is useful from both sides. And I kind of just, that's pretty much exactly what you just said.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. You know, when it comes to politics, which is something that I've been interested in for many years, even when I was a witness, um,
Yeah.
I've always felt that people on the extreme left and on the extreme right have so much more in common with each other than they do with the people in the middle on their own side.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
any thinking person, just look at the political climate around the world at the moment. You know, that would be obvious to anyone who really cares to look at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I look at the extremes on the political spectrum too, and I find so many similarities to the high control religious group, because they just have their set beliefs, and when you're talking to an extreme a person with extreme political views, you almost don't need to talk to them, because you know exactly what they believe on every major issue. It's not something they've thought about. They've just accepted the party line. This is what I'm supposed to believe because this is what my party tells me is appropriate. And it's just like being in a religion to some extent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So, how did you, or what made you decide to start a YouTube channel?
Um, well, I had finished my book, and like my I started writing the book in 2016 and published it in 2021. So it was kind of, I wasn't working on it full time for 5 years, but um, like when the pandemic hit, I think I had maybe 80% of it written, and I wasn't able to work for a lot of the pandemic. So for over a year, I had a huge amount of free time, and I just poured it into the book and got it finished. And then when I had published it, I just kind of felt like I had so much more free time. I kind of thought, well, what am I going to do now? And so I thought, well, like people don't really read nowadays. They tend to like listen like listen to podcasts or to watch YouTube. And so I kind of thought that it might be a good idea maybe to like take some things from the book and like turn them into short videos and just to kind of maybe like get the message out there that there is a book with that kind of content, and also just to kind of like do it for myself. It's when you spend so much time on a book, you might think that you know every single word in it word for word, but like I packed quite a bit into the book, so I actually do find it I find it rewarding to to dip back into it myself and then try to condense the thoughts into it for a short video. So I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying putting the videos out there, and so I kind of I gave myself the commitment of like doing it for 12 months, and if I'm getting something from it, I'll keep it up.
Well, I am really glad that you decided to do it because I've gotten so much value from your videos. Um, I think my favorite one is the one that asked the question, do, what's the real reason why Jehovah's Witnesses preach? And
Right.
that was really, really good. And it makes so much sense as well. Could you tell us a little bit about that video?
Yeah, there's not actually a section in my book that deals with like why Jehovah's Witnesses preach, but I do have a chapter on like the psychology and the sociology and the social psychology of the movement, and I just found looking into that like absolutely fascinating, because like you look at like group dynamics and how they operate, um, it's just it's just absolutely incredible how it like controls behavior, and how like certain acts aren't just for the act themselves, but are like an attempt to like manage your impressions that you give to other people, or how you're trying to signal your intent or your moral virtue. And I think the preaching work just has so many of those facets tied up in it, that it's like the linchpin of it's the reason it's the linchpin of the movement, because it indoctrinates the person themselves. Um, any response that people get from the preaching is seen as a confirmation that it's true, um, and it also functions as kind of like a policing mechanism, where other people are looking at other people to see if they're doing the ritual, um, so that it almost becomes a way that people are kept inside the movement, because you're constantly trying to demonstrate that the belief system is so important to you that you're willing to make this sacrifice, and the bigger sacrifice you make, the bigger signal you're giving. So it's almost like a competitive venture, where people are like scrambling to announce, how earnestly they believe it, and how much sacrifice they're willing to put in for that. So yeah, I find the and I don't make any pretensions that this is like a deliberate thing. I think these things often just develop organically within religions and within groups. It's just because we're social creatures. These like mechanisms just start becoming like epiphenomenon of group behavior, and um, I don't think it's like I don't think there's like some sinister meeting of the governing body where they say, well, how are we going to indoctrinate people and keep them in the group? I think this just like happens to a large extent by itself, but it's certainly fascinating for me to look at behaviors in the Watchtower movement, um, from like the perspective of not what they say the work is doing, but what it might actually be accomplishing in terms of the social dynamics and the individual psychology. And it's definitely something I find very interesting myself.
Yeah, me too. Um, I I absolutely hated the ministry. I absolutely hated it. It was worse than a chore, you know. And I don't think I've spoken to any former witness who has anything good to say about it. I mean, I'm sure there are some who genuinely did enjoy it, but I definitely wasn't one of them.
Yeah, me too. I didn't like it either, and I brought several people into the dogma. I mean, I even though I didn't like the preaching work, I really took it seriously. Um, I put my heart and soul into it, and um, something I feel really guilty for now, because at the time you think it's just the best thing in the world. You've met this person on first call. They make progress. Their wife becomes interested. They've got kids, and the kids like start going in the preaching work, and they then get baptized, and you're thinking, oh man, I'm doing something so valuable here. I'm saving lives. I'm teaching people the truth. And now I think, like, one of the young boys, his name was Petrus, and he was like this super serious, super like kind, lovely kid. And when I was studying with the family, I asked him what he wanted to be when he was older, and he said a doctor. And he was doing really good in school, so I kind of thought, that's great, he wants to be a doctor. But then after they came into the dogma, he changed his mind and he said he wants to be a Bethelite. And like now I'm thinking to myself, he's probably a grown man now, and if he's still in the dogma, if he went to Bethel instead of becoming a doctor, it's just a tragedy. It's just an absolute tragedy that the organization just strips people of their potential, and and the good that they could do for themselves and for others is just thrown away, and they're made to like serve the organization. And like it's just so sad. It's just like when you're out, of course, like when you're out, everyone knows this. You see everything in a very, very different light, and it's just extraordinary how profound that transformation is. You can go from seeing something as being the best thing that you could possibly spend your time on to viewing it with like disgust and contempt. And yeah, the perspective once you leave is really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It What it reminds me of is I often compare things to movies because I'm a real film buff, and my head is like an encyclopedia for movie quotes, movies, and movie scenes, right? So there's this movie called Equilibrium with Christian Bale and Taye Diggs, I think, if I remember rightly. And it's sort of like a not quite post-apocalyptic, but it's set in the distant future where human beings have decided that all emotions are bad. Emotion is a bad thing. Emotions are the reason why civilizations in the past had crumbled, and it's like the one reason why everything is bad. So people now every day they take this pill that suppresses their emotions. So everything they do is based on logic and reason. There's no feeling in anything. But then there's like a small resistance movement of people who stop taking their medication, and they're like waking up. And the main character, Christian Bale, he stops taking his, and he doesn't do it voluntarily. I think it's been a long time since I've seen the film, but I think maybe somebody swapped his pills with a fake or something, so he wasn't getting his daily dose of emotional suppressant. And then he woke up one morning and then looked outside as the sun was rising, and it brought him to tears. Seeing the sunrise, just the beauty and the awe of it, he just started crying. And I think that's a really good metaphor for what it is like waking up from indoctrination and seeing the world as it is for the very first time. It is a lot like that.
That's really interesting. I remember having kind of similar thoughts like that myself. That things that I would have like dismissed as being useless or unnecessary now just like take on totally new meaning for me. Like politics, for example. Like you just said. Like a good witness, I would have just dismissed it as all just useless and corrupt and unnecessary. And now I kind of feel like I have a civic duty to take part in that process because um, I if you have an opinion and you don't like take part in the democratic process, then your opinion shouldn't be listened to if you're not doing something about it. And there's so many other aspects to like just getting involved in the local community or like volunteering, which I've done a little bit of. It's just it wouldn't have really occurred to me to do that as a witness, but now I find it so satisfying and engaging. I have a completely different perspective on like helping out in the community than I would have when I was fully in.
Me too. Also, particularly when it comes to things like politics, like I voted for the very first time. Um, when was it? When was the election? It was a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
May the 6th, I think it was. Yeah, I voted in that election for that was the first time I'd ever voted in my life. But I felt a profound sense of responsibility, you know, not just then. I mean, when I started waking up, realizing that Armageddon isn't coming, Jehovah isn't just going to come and reset everything. So now I actually have to care when things go wrong in the world, especially if
Right.
it's within my power to make a positive contribution to it. And something I've spoken about with many ex-witnesses is empathy. And I certainly feel a lot more empathetic as a person now that I'm no longer a witness, which is kind of counterintuitive because as a witness, you think that you care about people. You think that everything you're doing is motivated by love and because you don't want to see anyone destroyed at Armageddon. Mostly when witnesses do the preaching work, it's for their own salvation because they don't want to be blood guilty, whether they realize that's the reason or not. But because witnesses have this thing that Jehovah's going to sort out the world, it's not my place. They don't really care about anything. They don't care about people's suffering. They don't care about people's, struggles or plights on a day-to-day basis. Or if they do care, they're not motivated to do anything about it because Jehovah's going to sort that out.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's almost like I'm very interested and concerned, like for example, about climate change. But as a witness, I would have this idea in my head. Well, okay, it's a big problem, but you know, Jehovah's in charge. Like Jehovah's not going to allow us to completely and totally destroy the earth so it's uninhabitable. But even though I would have been concerned as a witness, I wouldn't have the same level of interest in the topic as I would now because now I don't think God's kingdom is going to solve it. Or if there's like some kind of potentially big military confrontation, as a witness I would have thought, well, Jehovah's not going to allow like a nuclear apocalypse because that's not part of his plan. Whereas now I would think, like if there was some kind of major conflict between, say, the West and China, it would be something I would be desperately interested in trying to prevent, or doing what I could, or protesting, or writing to my MEPs or something. That wouldn't have occurred to me before because you just have that mental block that Jehovah's kingdom is going to sort everything out, and me getting involved is pointless, or even will be harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt exactly the same way. When I was waking up, I thought to myself, not only did I feel a sense of responsibility, I was also a little bit scared as well. I was thinking to myself, now it is actually possible that, we could end up destroying the world. We don't have that fail-safe anymore, that safety net of Jehovah and his kingdom. It means I can't sit by and just do nothing, if it's in my power to to contribute positively or to change something.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something the Watchtower organization kind of indoctrinates people with, is that you don't have a sense of responsibility. The only thing you should be concerned with is like doing what you're told. Having like a mature perspective on the world and on current events is just you don't do it, do you? It's just you can't have a mature, responsible mindset in the organization, because everything is just centered around preaching and mundane cult activities. You just can't have that sense of individual responsibility for your community or making decisions to contribute to the world. It's just it's stripped from you when you're in that kind of environment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this mindset that witnesses have of being in the world but not being a part of it. I see that very much now as like freeloading. It is a lot like freeloading, because you know, if as long as you're alive, you're benefiting from this wicked system in some way, shape, or form. You know, if you benefit from something, then you should contribute to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of something I read in Eric Hoffer's book as well. Actually, I think people watching this really might enjoy Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, because it's he talks about mass movements, and it's particularly political movements that he's talking about. But like, I'm sure any witness who reads that book will just see so many like striking connections with the Watchtower organization, because one of the things he stresses in the book is, like, to have a successful mass movement, you have to condition people in three ways. One, you connect the movement to like a glorious past, where like great figures in the past are connected with this current movement. The past or the present has to be just contemptible and miserable and disgusting, and you have to want to have no part of it, because the future is going to be this glorious fulfillment of like the party or the religion's destiny. That it's like the present is just an interlude between this glorious past and the glorious future kind of meeting up. And that's exactly how witnesses see the world. There was like a glorious past with great biblical figures and miracles in the Garden of Eden. The past is just this contemptible thing that we have to deal with. The future's coming that will ultimately just like realize this entire destiny. And that's like a cult mindset. And when I was reading it, he was talking about the Nazis, but it's exactly like the Watchtower movement, and I assume like lots of other high control groups too.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's even a scripture that says that, something about being temporary residents.
That's right.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I remember being at an assembly, and the circuit overseer gave a talk, and it was around this subject of being temporary residents in this world. And he said, when you go on holiday and you arrive at your apartment or your hotel room, you don't plumb in a new washing machine because you know you're not going to be there forever. You're only there temporarily. You know, you're there to eat and sleep. That's not your home. And he said that we should have the same kind of mindset or attitude toward this system. We're not here permanently. This is just like as you said, an interlude between the past and the future.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's funny. You can't have that like contempt and disdain for the whole system without it filtering into your viewpoint of people in general, right? I mean, if you think of the whole system as corrupt and degenerate, even if you're a people person and you've got like a high degree of empathy, it will start seeping into how you view people, like your neighbors in general, the people that you work with. It just you can't separate them, and you're going to start viewing people in a more negative light than you would have otherwise.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you'll see people as like expendable even. I mean, like I could never ever, even as a witness before I woke up, I could never get my head around how you could have a witness who has a non-witness spouse, but they, on by all accounts, and at least from an outsider looking in point of view, they have a very good marriage. But yet that witness knows that when Armageddon comes, their spouse, who they love and who loves them, is going to die. How do you wake up every single morning with that knowledge and still carry on with everyday life and maintain a healthy relationship? I just could not, and I still can't understand how you do that.
I think people rationalize things in a way. I mean, I certainly did that as a witness. I felt very uneasy with the idea of everyone who wasn't a witness dying at Armageddon, and it's kind of embarrassing to like admit this, but like I would have like fantasies of Armageddon. I would replay Armageddon in my mind, and I've watched a lot of your videos, and I remember you speaking about how it like frightened you or terrified you, and lots of witnesses say that, but I actually never had those feelings of like terror and fear. I like replayed fantasies in my mind of Armageddon coming, and like witnesses doing this like super intense preaching just before the end came, and like the tribulation was beginning, and like billions of people like just flocking to the organization. And I think that's to some degree like how I was able to rationalize this idea of Armageddon and not being afraid of it. That like the idea that ultimately a huge portion of the world's population would recognize what was happening and like come into the dogma. And even though that was contrary to what the Watchtower would have taught me, I think it's in some sense how I allowed myself to believe that these things were going to happen, that it wasn't going to be quite as genocidal as the Watchtower preached it to be.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because there's all sorts of different workarounds, mental workarounds that you have to do as a witness to try and reconcile the things that you either don't understand or don't agree with. And I think that in itself, the fact that so many witnesses do that in itself is a sign of being in a high control group.
Like when you have to like personally rationalize the belief system that's being given to you by an authority figure, yeah, you know there's a problem then, right? It's like trying to rationalize the behavior of an abusive spouse, like they're abusing you, and you're trying to say, well, they're stressed out, or they had a bad childhood. I mean, this might be true, but it doesn't justify the actions. And it's the same with the beliefs. I mean, if you are forced to kind of, as you say, like do a workaround on all these beliefs, it's like, yeah, it's a almost a certainty that you're in a high control group that's dominating your thinking, and it's something you need to break free from.
Yeah, quite right. So where are you with your life now? Would you say that you're much happier now that you're not a witness anymore?
Yeah, I would. I've had several periods in my life where I was quite depressed, but like now I would say I've never been in a healthier mindset. I've never been more at ease with myself, and I'm not at ease with myself, but I'm more at ease with who I am than I've ever been. Yeah, I'm definitely a happier person, and this is the paradox, because witnesses are told that Jehovah's Witnesses are like a happy people, and like doing what Jehovah wants you to do is going to give your life, satisfaction and happiness, and it doesn't. It drains you of it. It stops you from being your authentic self, and if you're not being truly who you are, then you're probably going to have mental problems. You're going to have issues that you can't quite explain. Why you're feeling anxious or stressed or depressed. And I'm not saying this happened overnight. I mean, I haven't been to a meeting in 9 years, and I'm not even disfellowshipped yet. I mean, I'm pretty much disfellowshipped because I have no connection with anyone, and I was like soft shunned pretty much from the get-go. But And that was a really traumatic time, like a very stressful thing. For me, emerging from the organization has taken years, but now that I'm like really properly out, I'm definitely happier than I've ever been in my life. You know.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. And I hear a lot of similar sentiments as well from many others, and myself included. You know, I'm so much more, as you said, at ease with myself now as a person. And I think in the past couple of years, one of me being a witness, I felt a huge sense of being confined. There are things that I wanted to do, things that I wanted to achieve. I didn't necessarily know why, but I just felt confined. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
But I don't feel like that anymore. I feel like that I'm free to express myself. I'm free to pursue things I want to pursue. I'm free to be who I want to be and be who I know that I am, that I truly am. And I didn't feel any of that as a witness, particularly towards the end. It was the complete opposite. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
And even in little things, I mean, this might sound trivial or trite, but I curse now, and I like cursing. You know, it's freeing and it's liberating. And you know, as a witness, sometimes I might have gotten like really angry and let one out, and I'd feel guilty and I'd be ashamed. And I find it very healthy. You know, if I'm frustrated or if I'm angry, just let out a few words, and bang, I find it helpful. And that might sound like a small thing, and it is, but there's 1,000 small things that you can't do as a witness that is hampering your expression, your happiness, your autonomy, your freedom, and those 1,000 things are like stopping you from being who you really are. And when you can just do those things, whatever it is, it's you just find a contentment that you just can't have as a witness.
Absolutely. It's funny you should say that because I have exactly the same experience, not necessarily with cursing. I mean, I do curse from time to time. I don't tend to do it in public. But with me, the things that I found very freeing and liberating is having my own time.
Right.
It's just so invaluable to know that on a Saturday morning I can wake up and stay in bed.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that one
Yeah.
thing alone is just huge. It is just huge for me, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I get what you mean. Mark, it has been an absolute pleasure and an honor speaking with you this morning.
Well, thanks. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, Riley. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, thank you so much for coming onto the channel, and I wish you all the best with your channel. And I'll definitely put links in the description below so that others can go and subscribe because your content is really, really good. It is really good, especially for anybody who's not quite woken up yet. You know, I'd highly recommend your channel.
Thank you.
And thank you viewers for watching. If you haven't already done so, please like the video and also subscribe to the channel with notifications. Please proceed to the Jexit in an orderly fashion and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching to the very end of the video. If you haven't already done so, please like, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. If you like my work and want to help me continue doing it, please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Jexit_2020. And with that, I'd like to sincerely thank these very special patrons who make these videos possible.